Hi. Hi guys. How are you guys? Okay, give me 2 minutes when I... Hi! 1 second guys. 1 second. Alrighty. Hi guys, hi. I'm just waiting for Anubhav to join me. It's gonna be an amazing day. Ask lots of questions. Next to your comment, there is a question mark. Please go ahead and ask questions there. We're gonna have a good chat with Anubhav. Those of you who don't know Anubhav Karmakar, he's an excellent runner. Ran a 2:41 in NYC Marathon, again 2:38 in TMM. So I'm just waiting for him to log in. Yeah, it is going to be a little more technical today because he's also a coach with Atloft Fitness. So yeah, we're just waiting for him to join in. I hope he read my message. Where is he? Where is he? I'm waiting, guys. So guys, whatever you do, just sign in your questions. Yeah, Anubhav is there. Okay. Anubhav, send me a request so I can add you. Awesome. Awesome. Couple of more minutes while we wait for everyone.
Am I properly?
Hey, oh my God, I can see the quarantine happening on you. All good and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, no, I'm just, nothing really. I mean, the beard started growing and I was like, yeah, I don't have a reason to sort of shave really. Not really training that intensely.
Let's not shave at
Yeah, this is probably the only opportunity to have a beard right now. So I'm making the most of whatever is available to me right now. I guess I can just say it.
For a minute, I was like, what happened? That comes to my next question. Are you showering regularly or it's like, and I'm like...
No. So, of course, I have been doing a few workouts here and there. So, you know, I am sweating it out a little bit. So, of course, I have to take a shower.
Fabulous. Did you take a shower today?
Yeah,
okay, I'm so glad. Awesome. So I think we will begin because we will have a question and answer section, and I really don't want to, take too much of time on, on our fun talk. All right. So, guys, let me introduce you to Anubhav Karmakar, an amazing guy. I met him in NYC finally, and what a gem of a person. I was struggling, and I was injured in NYC, and I still remember this guy ran a 2:41 hour full marathon in NYC, and I was struggling with that leg, and I still remember you came down walking from your floor, and you gave me that ice pack. So yeah, that still left a big impact on me. So yeah.
Oh no, anybody would have done that.
Not really.
I'm glad I could help. Yeah.
Yeah, that shows the sportsmanship. So yeah, that's awesome. I am absolutely privileged to have a conversation with you today, and it's about everything running.
My pleasure.
So guys, those who are tuning in now, there is a question mark next to your comment section. Please type in your questions here so that we don't spam the screen and don't spam Anubhav's face, especially with all the weird right now. Okay, so let's begin. Anubhav, let me just go back to my question. I have to put Anubhav here. Okay. Tell us a bit about yourself, about your running journey. How did it all started? And now a 2:38 full marathoner, and you give us amateurs hope that we can someday push our limits too. So yeah, and I know you were a bit unfit before your sports career and stuff. So tell us about that a bit, and let's begin from there.
Yeah, I mean, so I started off as an endurance athlete somewhere around 2013. Before that, when I was in college and I was doing my MBA, I used to be very, I would say, obese. And at that point of time, I started, focusing on my fitness and wellness, really, like focusing on nutrition and things like that. but I was not into any sport as such really. Never actively part of any sport before that. So then I started hitting the gym, and that's how I was able to, like, in a matter of 4 months, I was able to sort of come back to the normal, what you would call normally fit, the proper BMI. So from that point itself, I knew, like, I understood that fitness is an important aspect, right? And thereafter, in 2013, when I picked up, I think I started off as a cyclist really. Cycling, it was more of an adventure for me really, because I mean, I knew I need to stay fit, but I was getting bored hitting the gym really. And for me, cycling gave me an avenue to sort of stay fit while doing something which I enjoy. I found it more enjoyable than going to the gym. But again, that's a perspective. I'm not saying this is how it should be. A lot of people find it very motivating to hit the gym. And I mean, you should actually, I think what I try to tell people is you should find your motivation by trying out different things. So cycling was one of those experiments. And in the process, I got exposure to, other athletes, when I went out for rides with them. And then eventually found out about running as an endurance sport. And at some point I joined Hyderabad Runners, and I found motivation amongst them to pursue. I didn't know what a marathon is in 2013, mid 2013. I had no clue about a sport like this exists. And then I found out that people run 42 kilometers, and I was really surprised that people who are not athletes, right, can do that sort of a thing, right? I mean, when I say not athletes, I mean to say people who are not professional athletes. And it was a big shock for me to see amateur recreational athletes being able to accomplish what they were. And that's how I got initiated into the sport. And I think somewhere down that year, I did my first full marathon, and I finished miserably. I finished in 5 hours, 20 minutes in my first full marathon.
That was 2013?
Yeah. That was 2013. But I think that sort of made me realize that first year of running, whatever I encountered, the difficulties that I encountered, made me realize that, this is not something that you should just pursue without proper guidance and without a proper structure. And that there is a process involved, that although the activity of running is simple, it does involve certain skills. And it pays off to sort of follow a process.
Absolutely.
So that was how I started off. Yeah.
Fabulous. So, so you became a full marathoner before, and then you became a triathlete. Is that how?
Yeah. So yeah, somewhere 2000. So I was cycling first, and then I was running, and then I was maintaining a balance, but I was more of a cyclist. And then I found out about triathlons in 2014. And that's when I did, I started participating in endurance sports events. I did the Olympic distance triathlon. And then eventually between 2014 and 2017, I did a lot of triathlons. I was primarily, I could say, doing a lot of triathlons. I did a lot of Ironman 70.3 events across the world. Some of them being Turkey, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, and a few events in India. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the aspect of balancing three sports, and being involved in three sports. And as long as that gave me a kick, I kept participating in triathlons. And it's only in 2017 where my focus shifted more towards, I would say, cycling and running. Not running yet. Running was, I think, somewhere in 2018. But in 2017 also, I went to Thailand for a cycling tour, for a cycling race. Actually, it was a multi-day cycling race. And at that point of time, I was really, really keen on cycling as a sport. And I used to do a lot of cycle races. So it has shifted over time. I have done whatever at that point of time sort of interested me and whatever I enjoyed. So yeah, 2004, 2017 was triathlons. 2017 was mostly cycling. And then mid 2018. Or early 2018 is when I started, when it became running heavy, but I've never stopped cycling for sure. Like I still do a lot of cycling.
So, you excel in both. Like running is, I've seen you, like I've been knowing you and I've been hearing about you, and then finally met you in NYC. So triathlon and again, full marathon running, and we are talking about peak performance. Both require different sort of training and dedication. and how do we balance both, or does one sport helps the other in a way?
See, they definitely, because they are complementary to each other, the three sports. There is no doubt about that. But having said that, if, let's say, a triathlete was to pay attention to one single sport instead of three, he'll definitely be progressing a lot more. So, although your attention is divided, they are definitely complementary. It's not like they don't have similarities within them. But definitely, I mean, I have seen it from experience as a triathlete myself, and even as a coach, because I have dealt with multi-sport athletes, and I have seen myself and themselves shift from single sport to multi-sport and vice versa. And as a result, I've seen the effect that it has. I mean, the same person putting in the same amount of effort, I've seen the difference. So, of course, if you're focusing on a single sport, you see a lot more progress, right? So it's the really question is like, do you really enjoy doing it? Of course, it is a little more complex when you're doing three sports, right? To decide, to analyze which sport you need to give more attention to, right? Because there will always be a sport which is weaker than the other, right? So, training for them involves those complexities. There are logistical complexities for such races, because I really know, because I've done international races in triathlons as well as running. It's so much more stress-free when you're going for a running race as against a triathlon, because you have equipment, and there are a lot many more factors involved in a triathlon, right? We're swimming in an ocean and things like that. So environmental variables are also much higher. So it's very complex. And I think dealing with those complexities have taught me a lot, right? Mentally, as well as in terms of being a better planner, right? And that has had an impact on my ability to execute training in a more structured fashion. And so there are definitely things that you benefit from. Apart from just physical benefits, there is also logistical and mental benefits, I would say.
So now you are a full-time coach with Adsoft, and you're a founder as well. And you are a full-time athlete as well. And you were into the corporate sector like many of us. So what made you switch this entire thing? Because I am planning to switch, like leave my job and come into this sport full time, but I'm still like thinking whether it's going to work out or not. So yeah, for you, how was it like an impulse? Okay, I have to get into this now, or?
Yeah, so I think this decision is very individualistic. I will tell you what my experience is, but then it really depends on where you are placed, how you are placed. There are multiple factors. So as far as I was concerned, for me, it was simply a question about, whether I'm willing to sacrifice some of the perks, which come with the professional consulting career I had at that point of time, because I had invested a lot of time and energy in growing up in that career, even before the career started, graduation as an engineer and then postgraduate as an MBA, all of that with a specific goal in mind. So, and then once you started progressing in that career, it's obviously a big sacrifice. So I never had a period of shadowing, coaching in my normal consulting career, because my career was very intensive. It had its perks, but it also came with, a sort of a pressure which did not allow me to focus, let's say, to the extent which I would have liked to, right? Because it's also a question of how badly you want something, really, and how passionately you feel about something. So for me, I really wanted to, delve deep into the subject, right? And apart from that, I also wanted the freedom to be able to, experience a lot. So for example, if I wanted to race through the year in multiple locations, that is obviously a constraint. But then that really is a question of whether you really want it that bad. Whether you want to completely dedicate yourself to the sport. I felt that in our country, because I started looking at, how to train and coach, and I was also looking for a coach for myself. Although that never really happened. I've been self-coached right from the beginning. But I definitely felt that there was a void, because I was not able to sort of, find the kind of support system that I would have wanted. And I said, as with any problem, rather than cribbing about it, I felt like, why don't I dedicate myself to this craft, right? And I wanted to master the craft. I wanted to pursue excellence. And there were a lot of people who would approach me at that point of time, but I was not in a position to help them because of the demands of my job and, what I was pursuing as a hobby. So then I figured that, that there is an opportunity here, and I am willing to sort of dedicate myself to it. So as long as, I had the will, and as long as there was an opportunity, it made sense for me to sort of, pursue this professionally.
Awesome. I think I got my answer there. Perfect. Thank you for helping me out here. All right. So let's dive into your running bit here. So you started running in 2013 full marathons. When did you when did it actually came to you or it struck you that you can do a sub 3 hour? And which year was this? I know it, but I would like you to tell the people as well.
So the first thing is I had always in somewhere in the process of when I started training in a structured fashion, the one big lesson that I realized is I had abandoned the pursuit for goals like sub 3 or let's say sub 315 or sub 330. I never took that approach because over that time, by the time I was close to finishing under 3 hours, although in Berlin I finished just under 3 hours, so it might seem like as if I was targeting 3 hours, but that was not really the case. Over the course of coaching and training, I've realized that the importance of setting an objective goal. And sometimes when you set up a goal like sub 3 or sub 315, you might be off by a little bit. Generally, people tend to be a little more aggressive, and if they are, let's say, a 3.5, they tend to aim for 3, which eventually becomes a problem because thereafter your training intensities and your training is also skewed in the wrong direction. So it's not just about failing to achieve your goals finally. Eventually, that is what happens. But you also throw yourself into a lot of trouble during training itself because your intensities are set incorrectly, right?
Exactly.
So you make yourself more susceptible and vulnerable to injury. So that's why it's so critical to be very objective about your goal. I've always set my goals based on my current fitness level or whatever I've achieved in the past race. And I take it, couple of weeks, 3 weeks at a time. I analyze and I try to figure from the data that I see, and try and understand how am I progressing and how can I shift my goals progressively. So I've always believed in working not a top-down approach, but a bottom-up approach.
Wow, that's very good to hear. Yeah, that's very good to hear. Because most of the athletes that I come across, they always have because I remember doing Berlin when I was planning to do the BQ, I never aimed a sub 330 ever. I went with a mindset, okay, I'm going to do sub 330, but I could do it. That was great. But yeah, even sometimes I get caught up between this number goal. Okay, I have to train to beat this much. I think most of us we get caught up in this kind of
there is nothing wrong in having a number goal. So the question is the number goal realistic? So I've been coaching athletes to finish under 5 hours and some under 3 hours. And I've seen everybody has that myopia, whether it be 5 hours or whether it be 3 hours. So there is this whole hype about sub 3 at some point of time. And depending on the caliber of the runner, among some athletes, it will be a sub 4 hype. Among some athletes, it will be a sub 3 hype, depending on where you are. You need to see beyond that hype. The number obviously is needed, but the number has to be realistic. It has to be based on you and not rather what people consider as a good goal.
Okay, so now we are here and you're talking about training your athletes. Coaching, let's quickly jump into that. You train runners, and we're going to predominantly talk about running because again we are surrounded by most of the runners right now. What are the most rookie mistakes you see as a coach that runners are making?
There are quite a few of them. I would say primarily people not paying attention to skills as runners. Okay, people are not paying attention to the feedback that they get from their body. I mean, they know the feedback, but they choose to ignore that feedback, right? And I think the most critical thing, it all boils down to staying injury-free. I think the progress that I have made, if I was to identify what was very critical, is my ability to stay injury-free over these years, right? It's not like you do not. I've never encountered niggles. I've had issues because everybody has some or the other anatomical, let's say, discrepancies because of which you become susceptible. But it's important to sort of work on those discrepancies. It's important to identify what is missing in the very basics and the foundation of your running, and then work on those early in the career, so that you build a good foundation, right? And that really involves, as I said earlier, that I realized in the first year that there is some amount of skill involved. So it's important to focus on those skills and have a good mix of that in the onset, right? And that is why a lot of people are just focused on distance, volume, intensity, and skills have always taken a backseat, right? So one needs to understand that the workouts that they are doing, whether they are addressing skills, and skills is not just doing drills. It's also certain workouts can be designed in a way where they work on the aspects of skills and improving skills. So that, I think, has been a big loophole which generally athletes tend to ignore. I have also done that in the past, but it's very critical in order to stay injury free and keep progressing.
Coming to the critical, I'll take a couple of more questions because I really want to address the questions we have, and I have a lot of questions in front of me. What are the 3 or let's say 4 critical components that you think attributes to your performance time and again, getting PRs? We saw in Boston in 2019, again NYC in 2019, then again TMM in 2020. What are these 3 critical components that you think are attributing towards your performance? And I know the consistency, but I just would like to know a bit, because you're a coach, get more technical into that. So,
actually, both my last races, as you mentioned, Mumbai Marathon and New York, they're far from perfect. I actually had problems in both the races. TMM especially was full of problems. I sprained my ankle just the day before, and then eventually, although scraped through, but last 6 kilometers was a big disaster. But so I was disappointed as such with both my performances. 3:30. Yeah, and when I said that, a lot of people had said that there is no reason to be disappointed. I did a personal best. I've been doing my personal best and improving with every marathon, but it's also about getting to where you've trained for, right? And so I think, in some cases it was my mistake. I've always looked at disappointment as a positive aspect of running, because if you're ignoring those, you probably are not going to figure what your new area of improvement is in the next season, right? So that's always been the process, I think, to learn lessons from your previous performance. Even if you've done a personal best, there's always something. So even when my athletes sometimes, when they do a personal best, I feel happy for them. I congratulate them. But even in those performances, we can easily see some mistakes that they have done, and I always make it a point to point out, especially if somebody has ignored the very basics. Like I'm even more harsh when I see that the basics have been ignored, because eventually that is what leads to trouble, right? So it's easy to get over personal best in your initial years of running.
As coaches, it's our job to show them the mirror. Sometimes they don't agree to it and they think, but we know that somewhere that thing might have improved into a better performance, because that couple of splits that trust is important, to develop that trust with your athletes, so that they know that you are pointing something out because it's probably for their best, and so that they can avoid the myopia or the short-sightedness. Because as I said, it's easy to achieve a personal best in your initial years, but it's always later where you tend to start off stagnating, right? And I've seen that myself. I've experienced it. I have gone through that phase of stagnation when I was a 3 hour 15 minute runner, and I found it very difficult to progress. But then once I applied this process of always analyzing even my personal best from a critical point of view, after that, I think I was improving by 15 minutes every single year, irrespective of. What are those critical components again?
As I said,
not every, some of them, if you want to say.
Yeah, some of the realizations were I was not setting my goals objectively, right? Looking at these round numbers, right? Some of those, I was not focusing on my skills. I was not looking at as much data, simply because, what my stride length is and things like that. A lot of different factors. There are, every race there has been a multitude of factors, but some of them are those things, focusing on a lot of focus is on cadence, and then people don't look at, let's say, stride length or things like that. It depends on which stage of your running you are really. And because after a point of time, it becomes very difficult to identify also areas of improvement. It just becomes so tight to improve, right? Because you have almost started fixing in different areas. So that analysis, that critical analysis really needs to happen.
Okay, cool. Okay, so my next question. TMM, okay, I know you shared with me what happened in NYC. We're going to come back to that. A little hiccup that happened during the NYC marathon. You did 2:41, great. I know you were aiming at something else. But again, NYC is a very tough course. It's like flyovers after flyovers, and it's quite rolling.
Yeah.
From 2:41, somebody who's like going on full potential, to 2:38, like TMM. And many of us like shiver that back to back 2 PRs, that personal records, like or PBs that we call in India. What can you throw some light on your what key factors you kind of gave importance to, so that your recovery and everything, or you want to throw some light on that?
Yeah, I mean, it all boils down to the same things that I pointed out. It's like I think different factors. What I think let me talk about the pitfalls, right? What happens is, as I said, the major pitfall, I'm telling you, right in the roots, is not setting the objective goal, right? Once you've achieved, let's say I've achieved 2:41, I shouldn't think of, because I saw that happen when I achieved 2:41. A lot of people were thinking, Anubhav, you are going to do a sub 2:30, right? Immediately in your next race, or a sub, whatever. I mean, it's just some random number but you should not let that get into your head, right? You should, I only looked at where I am currently, as I said, and more importantly, giving respect, giving the body proper respect. And even when I work with athletes, I tell them that, listen, the plan is not golden. I could be wrong about the plan. I tell my athletes, your own feedback from the body is the single most important factor. The plans are made based on certain assumptions, but how do you identify the wrong assumptions? For that, you need to pay attention to your body, communicate that, right? You need to be aware of it. And if you're working with a coach, you need to communicate those so that you can because if you don't communicate that, then you have no basis to because plans cannot be, I would say, they can't be constant. They can't be permanent. I don't believe in plans as much as I believe in the process. So what is critical is if you're working on your own, if you're making your own plans, it's critical to understand or accept the feedback from your body, and then use the process to change your plans. So a lot of people think that the plan is golden, and that no matter what, in my training, I have to achieve what is there in the plan, which is not true. So that is the major pitfall, because people somehow think that is what is called as being determined, sort of reaching your goal in a certain amount of time, or executing your training plan to the 100% is a sign of determination. There's a thin line between being determined and between being adamant, right? It's important to be determined, and determination. Yeah. So you shouldn't be adamant. You should be determined. You should be focused and making sure you're consistent. But your consistency has to be the most important. And in order to be consistent, you have to be injury free. You have to allow your body to recover. So people don't pay attention to recovery as much, right? So when recovery is not happening, consistency goes out of the window, and thereafter your determination doesn't make sense. So your determination should be equivalent to your determination to be consistent, and not your determination to stick to the plan.
Fabulous.
So, and for that you need to focus on recovery.
Fabulous. I think that was a fabulous answer, and yeah, I personally loved it. Okay, I want to quickly mention that instance that we shared during NYC. Something happened, and there was a little hiccup during the race. And how did you share that? Because I know, but I want people to know, and how to not get demoralized mid race, and how to get back with that focus again in the race. And you want to share about that, because I was absolutely shocked when you told me.
Of course, what happened is in between the race, I had to take a loo break, and that eats away your time. And because I was looking at an aggressive time goal, so obviously when you lose a minute, it's a lot, right? And so the first thing which strikes. I think that it was somewhere around under 240 is what my goal was. 239 something the goal must have been. It could have, I can't recall exactly, but it could have been 280, 238 as well, 238 something, I guess. But obviously when I took the break, I was a little off. So the immediate knee-jerk reaction is to sort of compensate for that, right? And build up your pace, because you have, when you get closer to the race, you have built an expectation. But then when you do that, you obviously soon start realizing that you are going into a zone which is going to drag you into trouble. So you feel nervous about, of breaking down somewhere. You start feeling a little bit of that feedback, right? When you overexert your body, because I was already, let's say 17, 18 kilometers into the race. So when I suddenly pick up the intensity, but I think that the nervous energy is actually a positive thing, because it keeps you grounded, right? But that comes with, I think, a little bit of experience, and it also comes with, that is why training is so important, right? Training gives you experience. It teaches you about your body, right? About the signals from your body, and it teaches you that you need to respect the signals from your body. It's a lack of training. It's not just, not only does it, training not only makes the physical adaptations, but it also does these mental adaptations. It teaches you to pick signals from your body. It teaches you that it is important to respect these signals, because
Absolutely.
if you don't, you will face a disaster. So you will have good days and bad days in training, right? The bad days teach you a lot. So don't always feel disappointed when you have a bad day in training, because those are lessons which will be very handy when you face a contingency during a race. So I guess, it's very difficult to define exactly what must have happened and what I must have thought. Let's say I'm feeling a little crampish in my calves or somewhere in the quads, right? I sort of know, I can identify the signal at its earliest, right? Because of the experience that I have. Someone with lesser experience or lesser volume of training will realize much later and will give it less importance, right? So that, I think, starts playing in. Your maturity as a runner comes with the amount of volume of training you've done.
True. Okay. I'm going to hold this chat for a bit, and I'm going to quickly take questions, because we are already half an hour into the chat, guys. So
Yeah.
let me go ahead, take some questions. Okay. Okay. Somebody's asking for a runner's diet. What according to you is a runner's diet? And also, because someone mentioned there, I'm going to take it right away. What is your typical breakfast? So what people ask these questions a lot. What do you typically eat before you're going into a hard workout? Hard workout as a speed training or a long run. So yeah, they want to just ask them.
As I said, even with nutrition, it tends to be very specific. Even some of the athletes I work with nutritionists, because they want to get specific advice. I work with their nutritionist. So even though I will tell a few things, it's going to be very generic. It's very difficult to say, because it also depends on your makeup as an athlete, how you are, what your current circumstances are, what your experience level is. So what I used to eat before a hard workout is very different from what I ate when I first started off as a runner, as against now. So I'm capable of handling a lot more, intensity and volume at a much lower, let's say, energy input, as you understand, right? Because when you become more efficient as a runner, you require lesser inputs. So it really is a factor of, you have to work with the athlete itself to identify, what will work for them. And then again, nutrition, there is a lot of, I primarily believe nutrition is a function of genetics, right? Absolutely. I come from that school of thought. I don't believe in generalizing, but at this point of time, you can't do genetic testing to figure out everything, right? So you have to go a little bit of hit and try. So you have to try out different things during races. You have to try out different things during the training and figure what works out. But the general guideline is, if you are doing an intense workout, either make sure you are consuming something like a banana, to sort of get a little bit of energy reserve, or you could be consuming some energy drink between your workouts, because some people find it difficult to, especially if it's a hard workout, an intense workout, their digestive system might not be well equipped to sort of handle that intensity as well as digest some food, right? So you will have to sort of figure that out. Some people, a meal of, let's say, if I'm going for a really, really long workout, which generally tends to be the case when I'm cycling as against running, you're a lot more tolerant. So I tell you, right, as an athlete, depending even on the sport, my nutrition would change, because as a cyclist, I can consume a lot of food and still do a highly intense workout, as against running, where it might be difficult to carry that food, right? So I typically tend to, if I'm doing like a long 4-hour ride, right, I would consume, let's say, something like oats. Oatmeal is one of my favorite recipes, because I think it's easily digestible. It has a lot more, and always go for whole oats, whole food. And I find it's easy to digest, and at the same time, it gives sustained energy. So there are many such things which I find suits me well. But at the same time, if I am, I also consume coffee. Most days, morning, I will have a cup of coffee. If not, if I'm going for a easy run, also I will have a coffee to just, But having said that, you should try it out whether it works for you or not. For example, I found out that through some genetic test that my caffeine metabolism is low. So which means that the half-life of the coffee that I drink is much higher. So overconsumption of coffee will hit me much more. I will find it difficult to sleep. So you need to be aware of these things, because it shouldn't start affecting your sleep, right? So things like that, you need to find out a little more about yourself, try out different things. What kind of food will suit you before a race? Because I generally tend to eat, like if I'm in a race, 2 hours before the race is when I will consume my food. It's generally oatmeal mixed with bananas and some coffee. That works out well for me. But I think an important thing to keep in mind is you should be aware of your food sources. Have as much clean food as you can. Reduce processed food, right? Avoid having calorie-dense food. That's a general guideline I would like to give. Have as much whole food as possible. Have as much like fruits, right? Early in the morning or earlier in the day, have fruits. Have as much whole food as against processed food. So the more you are going towards things like roti, atta, bread, this is a lot more processed. So generally my food has changed as my knowledge of food and nutrition has changed. I'm sure it will keep improving over time. I think my food choices will also change. So I eat a lot more non-processed food, especially during the lockdown. I think I've made significant progress. I've made significant changes in the way I eat food. I'm eating a lot more natural and processed food today. Make an assumption that it will work out. But at the same time, considering that there are restrictions, you should basically think about building your foundation so that when things tend to come back to normal, you are in a position to sort of take advantage of the better foundation that you've built, right? Yeah. So work on your things like mobility and the stability of your body if you are completely restricted to home, right? And then use that foundation later. So eventually it might end up being an advantage actually, because you were earlier only focused on, workouts, running based workouts, probably ignoring a few things. So rather than that, now that you're in a situation where you have the opportunity to do things which can be done in a limited space, a lot of running improvement can happen in a limited space. Focus on those things and don't do general stuff. Use this time to identify, assess what is wrong, right? Reflect on that and then work on those specifics. So then you will be using your time, utilizing this time window in a much better fashion. So focus on being actually more effective rather than just running.
What is your favorite workout, speed workout? Or I would love to know this. I mean, what do you enjoy?
No, so over the years, I'm telling you, every race that I've trained for, I have followed a different training principle and a different sort of plan. Primarily because I'm self-coached, so I have always used myself as a guinea pig, so that I am also able to sort of judge the efficacy of a certain workout, right? So I have gone through such a huge variety, and I mean, for me, there are many workouts that I enjoy, but I don't, just because I've enjoyed it, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will feature in my next training. So I used to love, let's say, cruise intervals, right? They're still been a permanent feature in my workouts. Kind of enjoy them because there's this great balance of volume as well as intensity, and it is very close to what it feels like during a race. So it also gets you, it's a very good way of assessing whether your current goal assessment is correct or not. So I think workouts which give me a great sense of direction in terms of my progress, in terms of whether I'm being objective, are the ones which I tend to enjoy the most, because once you've successfully executed them, they kind of tell you that yes, you're on track, and it adds to your confidence as a runner. So I kind of enjoy those workouts.
Just one workout if you have to name one. I know, I love 4,000-meter repeats, honestly speaking. I love them.
I mean,
especially when I'm nearing a race.
Sorry?
I love the 4,000-meter repeats. Yeah, that kind
4,000
of.
meters. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of times
So.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, right, like for me, it's tough. As I said, cruise intervals is, again, cruise intervals is what I enjoy the most, but cruise intervals are never, their distance kind of changes over time. So it depends on where you are in your current training plan. So I get into a phase where I'm doing a lot of cruise intervals week after week, but the length of the cruise interval varies as I progress. So I cannot mention a specific distance, but cruise intervals would be somewhere, let's say, ballpark around 10 minutes of high intensity.
Fabulous.
Right? Yeah. So there could be like 10 to 12 of those intervals. So they could last somewhere, close to, I have done cruise intervals which have lasted close to 23 kilometers, 24 kilometers in total length. But that distance would also vary depending on my pace. So as I've progressed over time, my workouts tend to be longer in terms of distance, because even though the duration is constant, because I've become faster, the distance of the race is also varied. So tough to say in terms of distance what it is, but generally, let's say 10 minutes of high intensity, a lot of intervals of 10 minutes of high intensity, because you also have to manage your nutrition and hydration in those kind of workouts while doing a lot of high intensity stuff. So it's challenging, and it also gives you great feedback in terms of whether you're on track.
Super. Okay. I'm going to take next question. Okay, I'm trying to, 1 second, let me see something. Can you see the question that you're in? No?
Yeah, I see a question around running in an apartment.
That? Definitely, that's what you can't see. So if you can't see the questions, please pick one.
Yeah, I think the question is around, I see a question around running inside your apartment. I want to understand.
The question, it will flash on the screen right now and everybody can read it.
Oh, really? Okay. This is my first live session on Insta.
That's all right. So open and just click the question that come on the screen.
I click the question, it says report comment. I don't know.
What is the name of the question? Just tell me the question.
Okay, this question is from the off-base athlete. His question is for both of us. Your thoughts on running inside your apartment or restricted space during the lockdown?
Okay, please answer that question. That is a very common question that's coming every single day.
Yeah, I've heard instances of people running a full marathon inside their house. So, in fact, one of these questions was from my athletes itself. So I can, you should be able to manage it through your normal breathing process. And a lot of times what this will give you the response which I had for that athlete. Like, I understand if you're running within your apartment complex, it's fine. If it's within the house, my worry is that there is just not enough space for you to sort of maintain a good running form. Right? My issue is not where it's done. My issue is whether you are in a space where you can run in your natural running form or not. Thing is, if you're running in a very confined space, you will have to sort of break every now and then, change direction and things like that. And which is not going to be very helpful in the long run, because it will lead to development of bad habits. Right? Because the idea of running is to sort of inculcate a better running habit. So that is why running with a good form, even during training, is so important, because it gets hardwired into your neural pathways, right? So if you are running in a space which doesn't allow you to run naturally, you're going to pick up those bad habits, right? So it's better not to run and focus on other aspects. It's better not to focus on just distance. If you are in a limited space where you can't exit your house, then I think you're better off trying to work on things which will help build a good foundation. But if you're in a space where, even if it's like a 200-meter stretch, which allows you to sort of run with your natural running form, I think that would be nice.
Fabulous. Yeah. Fabulous. Okay. I'm going to take the next question, and 1 second. Okay. this is a very common question as a coach. I get it a lot. How to breathe? Would love for you to answer this one because our audience might get some help. Breathing for runners. It's a very common
Sorry?
question. Can you see the question on your screen?
I don't see a specific question really.
No. So it says, tell us more about the importance of breathing for a runner and what would you recommend is the correct way to breathe, especially, yeah.
Yeah, I've never followed. I mean, I know a lot of theories around breathing patterns, right?
Yeah.
But I haven't had any such specific advice because I mean, a lot of people say you should go for nasal breathing, but it completely depends on kind of intensity you're working out at, right? If you're doing a VO2 max workout or if you're doing a high intensity workout, it's not possible to sort of breathe. Your breathing pattern will change. Absolutely. So I think, yeah. So I have never sort of had any specific advice when it comes to any sort of breathing pattern that you need to maintain. I think your breathing needs to be consistent. I mean, there are a lot of different patterns, say, 2-2 pattern, 2-2 pattern, and I mean, there are a lot of those things. But I think what's important is, I've always said is, if you're having trouble breathing, first pay attention to whether you are training at the right intensity or not. Because if you're training with the right intensity for the right duration of time, you should be able to manage it through your normal breathing process, right? And as I said, with anything specific to, let's say, a particular injury or nutrition or breathing, I find it difficult to sort of give because there is just such a myriad of things that are possible. So, I mean, when it comes to breathing, it really is important to sort of work with the athlete to understand when they are encountering the breathing problem and then ask specific questions around what kind of a problem it is. And then identify, what is it that can be done to improve that aspect. So unfortunately, I don't think so I'm doing justice to this question, but it's really a very, very specific question. Yeah.
All right. Okay. There was a question here.
I don't know if you have any thoughts, please go ahead. And
so when I coach people, it's very simple that, okay, I don't follow the nasal breathing and, a mouth breathing. I say just be comfortable like what you say. But yeah, I do say that, okay, focus on exhaling more because inhaling is kind of subconscious thing. So the more you exhale and keep like every now and then if you're doing a hard workout, take a deep breath out and exhale. But again, I tell them to follow their natural form. I never ever say that, okay, no, you have to do a nasal breathing or you have to exhale from mouth. I don't believe in that. I've done it. I can't. Being an asthmatic, can't do it. Can't do it. Okay.
Yeah.
Another question which I also had for you, it's about your recovery. How do you recover after a race or after a hard workout? What are like the steps you follow to recover? Because this is something that a lot of guys struggle with after a long run or maybe after a speed interval or maybe a marathon. Yeah, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think to start off, if someone is new to running, they should follow some cool down and dynamic stretching and even a little bit of static stretching, right? But as you become more experienced as an athlete, you will start identifying certain muscles and tissues which become your areas of focus because of a certain body type and a certain running style. Everybody has different or rather even because of certain weaknesses in certain muscles, certain imbalances, you will notice that you will have certain physical problems, right? So apart from working on those problems, because you should actively work on those problems, but unfortunately, because you're already in the process of training, because you can't just fix an issue and get back to running, you're still in the process of running, right? But as a result of these imbalances, you will have certain tissues and muscles which experience problems, right? So try and find out what you can do specifically, right, to address that kind of tightness or those specific, muscles or tissues which need focused recovery. So do stretches and do specific massaging, work on your what you call as tissue mobility, right? Certain tissues in your body might have restricted mobility and they get taxed a lot more. So you should work on the mobility before your run. And a lot of times what you do between your runs and before your run can be very, very effective, right? It's important to sort of cool down also, reduce your intensity of whatever you're doing, whether it be cycling or running. Just reduce the intensity for the 5 to 10 minutes. That's important. Not to come to a standstill right after a high intensity session or a very intense session. So cool down is important. And thereafter, if you have specific issues, identify what those issues are and what you can do to address those. right? Rather than just doing generic, do the generic stuff, but remember to do the specific stuff as well.
Super. I'll take one more question and we're going to wrap it up. Okay. Let's see if there is an interesting question. There are lots of them actually, but most of them we have actually discussed somewhere during our conversation.
Yeah.
Give me 1 minute. Sorry guys. All right. This is an interesting question, and I'm going to sum up with this: endurance versus speed. I think you want to answer that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not a question of versus really, because speed is the rate at which you are moving, right? Absolutely. And endurance is how far you go, right? So both are equally important factors, right? But if someone is saying speed in the sense of speed training, right, or speed work, one needs to understand the reason why you do speed work. It's not necessarily to teach your body to move at a faster pace. It has a lot more objectives that it works on, because when you are training at a high intensity, you basically are asking your body to be as efficient as possible, in order to sort of pull in that extra amount, right? So it forces your body to be more efficient, and that is where the importance of speed training is. It's not necessarily about teaching your body how to move faster. That is one aspect. It's just a very small aspect of speed training, right? So if the question is whether I rather like to refer to speed training as the better terminology is high intensity training. So of course there needs to be a balance. A lot of people will say it's an 80-20 balance and things like that. I will not go into those specific numbers, because it also depends on which stage of your training you are in, right? In certain cases, you might be having one high intensity session in a certain phase of your training. In certain phases, you might be having two specific high intensity sessions. For certain athletes, it could also be a long endurance session which involves certain high intensity intervals in it. Depends on your capability as a runner. So, but I would definitely say that that these intense sessions definitely are important from the perspective of improving your skills. They do play a big role. So it is important to sort of have a balance of it, but you need to design it very carefully.
Okay, last question, and 1 minute, because before this, I don't want to take too much time. We've already exceeded it. Okay, what's the road ahead? Pandemic around us. There looks like no races anymore till September. How are you planning to stay? You like working again on your skill set, or improving your skill set rather, or what now? What's the road ahead? Or do you think, are you there? I don't know if he's there. Yeah, are you there? Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I had an incoming call. Yeah, I guess I lost you for a moment. Yeah, sorry. Can you finish?
Yeah, what's the road ahead for Anubhav Karmakar this year, given September 2019, 2020 तक तो कुछ भी नहीं हो रहा, nothing is happening till September 2020, but then still, what's the road ahead?
So really, the situation is such that it's difficult to predict anything beyond, let's say, a week or 2 weeks, really. So that is my first thing which I've sort of locked into my brain, and which is always what I communicate to anybody whom I'm interacting with in this respect, right? So it also depends on what the ground situation is, because how I am able to train really depends on that, right? So at this point of time, my focus as an athlete is to identify what I can improve, so that I can already start laying the foundation, and I know what my objectives will be when I go into full force of training, right? As an athlete, I feel I'm nowhere close to my full potential yet, because I have been improving. I have consistently been improving by 15 minutes every year. I haven't seen that dwindle yet. Based on that, my objective assessment is, I don't want to be complacent, but my objective assessment is that there is definitely a lot of scope, and I see many more years of improvement being there. So once the roads open up, I'm definitely looking at challenging myself in terms of the goals, and always one race at a time. I don't know what's going to happen in 2020. If I'm able to make it to a race in 2019, I would look at where my current fitness level is. I will because I have been training almost in the past few years. I haven't really taken any breaks. But in this case, it seems there's been a considerable break in terms of my in terms of volume and the amount of stress that I've put myself. So in the past, I could use my previous target to determine, how to go about and go ahead and train. But now, once sort of get back to normal training, it will be a little different. I will have to sort of do that assessment as to where I stand. I can't use, let's say, the 238 as an assessment to determine what I have to do in the immediate near future. So that is what it will be, and then I will see, how I'm progressing and determine what to do next. As I said before, I am not going to set myself a random goal. There are things I would like to achieve, but I'm not going to let that affect my training. So let's see. I mean, when and what can be done, right, in the near future, and then take one step at a time.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Anubhav. I think the Insta will also stop our video right away because it's almost 1 hour chatting and it just flew by like this. Thank you so much for joining us. It was absolutely
It was my pleasure.
So much of insight into your training and how you plan your races. That's something I've never heard anyone talk like this, especially here in India. So thank you so much. Thank you guys for joining us. Thanks,
my pleasure. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining, and I wish everyone the best. Stay healthy and take care.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thanks. Bye.
Ciao.